Chapter 4. The Manuscript. Miss Holt read the unfinished manuscript that evening in the study by the light of Evelyn Marsh's own reading lamp, while Inspector Bray sat opposite her with a pot of tea that Mrs. Coombs had, this time, watched being poured from start to finish, as though determined that no one should ever again have cause to ask her a question about a cup she could not account for. "You've been at that an hour," Bray said, when the clock on the mantel struck the half. "Anything worth the reading?" "Everything is worth the reading," said Miss Holt, not looking up. "The question is whether it is worth the reading twice, and I suspect, Inspector, that this particular manuscript will want reading 3 or 4 times before it has told me everything it knows." The novel was called, provisionally, The Ledger, written in pencil on the title page and then gone over twice in ink, as though Evelyn had settled on the title slowly and wanted to be sure of it before committing. Its plot followed a woman named Eleanor Hartwell, who slowly comes to suspect that someone in her household is altering her medication, a little at a time, in a manner too gentle to trigger alarm in any doctor not specifically looking for it. Eleanor Hartwell begins keeping a private ledger of her symptoms, dates, and doses, hidden inside a false compartment in her writing desk, because she does not yet know whom to trust with the truth. "It reads less like fiction," said Miss Holt, turning a page, "and more like a woman working something out loud, using her characters as a sort of private arithmetic. Listen to this." She read aloud, her voice level and unhurried, the way she read most things that troubled her. Eleanor had always believed that a body announced its betrayals plainly, a fever, a wound, some honest evidence a doctor could weigh and measure. It had not occurred to her, until now, that a betrayal might arrive instead in teaspoons, so small and so patient that even the person being betrayed would doubt her own eyes before she doubted the hand that fed her. Bray set down his cup. "That's not a novelist working out a plot, Miss Holt. That's a woman describing her own mornings." "I rather think it is both," said Miss Holt. "Evelyn Marsh spent her whole life turning her fears into fiction, Inspector, the way some people turn grief into gardens or anger into long walks. I suspect it was the only language in which she felt entirely safe telling the truth. Fiction could be denied, revised, laughed off as invention, in a way that a direct accusation to a living housekeeper of 20 years could not." She closed the manuscript gently and sat with it a moment, her hand resting flat on the cover, before she rose and crossed to the desk itself, the real desk, not Eleanor Hartwell's imagined one. She ran her fingers along its underside with the particular patience of someone who has searched a great many desks before and knows that a hiding place worth finding rarely announces itself. "What are you looking for?" asked Bray. "A ledger," said Miss Holt. Eleanor Hartwell kept one, hidden inside a false compartment in her writing desk. I have found in 20 years of this work, Inspector, that novelists borrow their villains and their settings freely enough, but they very rarely invent their hiding places out of nothing at all. A good hiding place has usually been tested first in life before it is trusted to fiction. It took her a quarter of an hour. The drawer, when she found it, was shallow, set beneath the lowest true drawer, the kind of space that reveals itself only to someone looking for exactly that, a seam slightly too wide, a depth slightly too shallow for the drawer above it to be telling the whole truth. Inside was a small notebook bound in the same green cloth as Evelyn's other working notebooks, so that it might have passed, at a careless glance, for nothing more than another store of ideas. It was not ideas. It was dates. The entries ran across the last 4 months, in Evelyn's own small, careful hand, growing very slightly less steady toward the most recent pages, as though the hand that wrote them had itself begun to falter. Dizziness, recorded on a Tuesday, then again the following Thursday, then with increasing frequency through July. Confusion in the evenings that cleared, without fail, by morning, a detail Evelyn had underlined twice, as though she found it significant that her mind returned to her each day only once the danger, whatever it was, had passed for the night. A heart that fluttered oddly on days when it had no business fluttering at all. And beside several of those entries, in brackets, the single observation, better at Constance's in Bath, which Miss Holt read twice before setting the notebook down. She noticed she was better away from home, she said quietly. Away from her own house, said Bray, and her own housekeeper. Beside each date, in a column of Evelyn's own devising, ruled in pencil with the neatness of a woman used to keeping her own accounts, was recorded who had brought her tea and tablets that particular morning. The column was almost entirely one name, written in the same small, careful hand each time, unwavering across 4 months of mornings. Mrs. Coombs. There were exceptions, Miss Holt noted, turning the pages slowly. A handful of entries where the column read Francis instead, on mornings when the housekeeper had evidently been away or unwell. And on every one of those mornings, without exception, the symptoms recorded beside the date were markedly milder or absent altogether. Miss Holt sat with that particular pattern for a long moment, because a pattern that holds without a single exception is either a coincidence of extraordinary discipline or it is not a coincidence at all. She suspected, said Bray quietly, reading over Miss Holt's shoulder now, his earlier scepticism entirely gone. For months, and she never said a word to anyone alive. She said a great deal, said Miss Holt, closing the notebook with the same care she had opened it. She simply chose to say it to paper instead of to people because paper does not warn the person it is written about, and people, however carefully approached, sometimes do, without ever meaning to. I imagine she was afraid, Inspector, not only of what she suspected, but of being wrong, and of what it would do to 20 years of trust to have voiced a suspicion she could not yet prove. She turned to the final entry, dated only 6 days before Evelyn's death, and read it once to herself before she read it aloud. If I am right, Evelyn had written, then I have been slower to act than any character I would ever have permitted myself to write, and I have only my own fondness to blame for it. If I am wrong, then I have wronged a woman who has cared for me faithfully for 20 years, and no apology I could offer would ever be equal to that. I do not yet know which fear frightens me more. The room was quiet for a moment after Miss Holt had finished reading. She was still deciding, Bray said at last, right up to the end, whether to believe it. She was still deciding, Miss Holt agreed, which is precisely why she left instructions rather than accusations. An accusation demands to be believed today, Inspector. An instruction can simply wait, patiently, folded into a drawer or a solicitor's safe until the day it is finally needed, and ask nothing of anyone in the meantime but that they find it in time.